And now we're going to talk to Alderman Sandy Weidner about a very hot topic in Racine right now, and that's the disposition of one of the mounds in Mound Cemetery. And I'd like to open up this segment with reading a little something that I found on the internet last night in some research. Perhaps 3,000 years ago, nomadic Indian tribes called woodland mound builders chose this as a ceremonial meeting place and a sacred burial ground. That's Mound Cemetery. Among the trees and along the river bluffs, they sculpted both conical and animal effigy mounds from which the cemetery would later take its name. Now, at this issue here, Alder Gal, as you say, Weidner, seems to be, is there any bodies buried underneath this area? But my question to you right now is there a greater issue than just bodies? In other words, if they don't find any remains of any bodies down there, is it open game now? Just tear the mound up, do what you want with it? It's insignificant?
I don't believe so. And by the way, thank you so much for inviting me. Good morning, George.
Good morning.
Happy to be here. I'm always happy to talk about my beloved Mound and Grayson cemeteries, especially Mound Cemetery, because of the historic significance of that cemetery, which does come from its vast history, where the purchase was made from the American natives with a promise that we would protect and preserve the mounds that are in that cemetery. And to answer your question regarding if there are bodies buried, that really is irrelevant. And that was even stated when the geologist came to do the soil bore corings, that regardless if they found bodies or not, which they probably wouldn't because it's a 40-foot diameter mound, the likelihood that of the 8 or 10 core soil borings that they would take, the likeliness of them finding bones would be insignificant.
Well, that's the way it appeared here when they talked, this description here. This was a ceremonial meeting place. Does that mean anything?
Absolutely it does, and according to state and federal statutes, there are protections for land areas such as that mound that protects that. And I was a little surprised by the position that the Wisconsin Historical Society took regarding that mound. And that's why we're dealing with the issues that we're dealing with right now.
Well, this is another thing that kind of interested me. When let me reach over here, when it talked about the temporary injunction. And the way the article read was that there was a petition for a temporary restraining order. And it was withdrawn because the city went out and got a permit. And I thought, wait a second, that's not the way the restraining orders work. Restraining orders work if everything's go on something, we're going to put the guy in jail or we're going to tear the building down or something, everything's going, but we need to review the issue despite all the go type of thing, so we get a restraining order in there. And I said, oh, wait a second, so what if they got a permit? That's when we really want the restraining order. So what's the story with this restraining order and the permit and all this type of thing?
If I understand correctly, what was explained to me by the city attorney, that the permit was requested to undo the injunction, because once the permit was put in place, then any interested parties, such as the group formed with William Brown, would have standing, and they would be able to request a hearing before a judge in regards to what that mound is.
Wait a minute, that's what the restraining order provides, right?
No, there's a little difference.
All right, so let me understand. In other words, they dropped the restraining order because once they got the permit, then they would be allowed to appeal it anyway?
Appeal it to the Wisconsin Historical Society, and from there they would go before a judge.
Okay.
That would make a determination. In the meantime, I've been in contact with Dr. Kara Kaufman, who is an anthropologist from UW-Milwaukee, who is willing to come down and talk to the council and how she can make a determination regarding that mound.
All right.
And then put that mound along with the others on the National Historic Registry, so that that land would be, as we promised when we purchased it, protected throughout.
All right, well, the Historical Society seems to have tremendous amounts of influence on this thing. It's like, I'd say the permit coming from the Historical Society, normally that comes from a governmental agency, permits like this. And is there something I'm missing on the Historical Society's prominence in the
Well,
political structure?
I think there's something we're all missing. Meaning no disrespect to the Wisconsin Historical Society, but they seem a little schizophrenic on this whole topic.
Well, that's not disrespectful.
A matter of fact, you know, I, along with several other commission members, had called the Wisconsin Historical Society when the request first came to the Park and Recreation Board, asking them to rescind the Cemetery Commission's recommendation to not sell that mound. So several of us contacted the Wisconsin Historical Society, and I myself talked to 4 different people who gave me 4 different pieces of information that kind of competed with one another, as did the other 2 individuals from the Cemetery Commission. When they spoke with the Wisconsin Historical Society, they had gotten conflicting information. And of course, all that information we got conflicts with the information that was provided to our Parks Director and to our City Attorney and to our City Administrator. So there's a lot of conflicting information that came out of there.
And which gets me back to the original question. How much of this questioning or going to this Historical Society involves purely the question of digging up bodily remains? And that seems to be, when I heard on the news report this morning, was that the party that wants to take over that part of the cemetery will do nothing, won't touch it at all if there are any bodily remains. But if it's more than that, if it's ceremonial sites, something that's got that religious and historical connotation to it, why would you want to disturb that either? Have a bunch of new bodies in there where that was a place set aside for meetings and ceremonies, and you might have had a dead person on it, but you buried them. Excuse me, but you buried them someplace else, in other words, okay?
Whether, and I've said this from the beginning, whether there are people buried in that mound or not, it is a mound.
That was another thing I saw. There were 15 mounds in there, I think 14 mounds according to the marker at the cemetery. There's a marker there that says there's 14 mounds, right?
Well, not counting the mound that's in question, I've only counted 12 mounds. So we
Ooh,
seem to have lost
maybe
2 mounds.
that's
And I'm not counting the symbolic mound that's at the intersection there of West Boulevard and Kinsey Avenue. So I'm not counting that one, but I've counted 12 mounds.
Well, before I leave the question about the Historical Society, because I've got another one here, is the Historical Society considering it from the viewpoint other than as a burial place?
I don't know how they're considering it. And the reason that I had approached the Wisconsin Historical Society in the first place is because they own the hotline that says if you have any concern that a possible burial place is being disturbed, please call this 800 number.
Yes,
And
I
if
saw
they're
that
not
notification.
available, if they're not available at that 800 number, then please call either your local sheriff or the district attorney to preserve and protect that mound.
But the problem is that it only addressed it as a burial place, not as a ceremonial meeting place, right? Is the way you described the request for calls.
Well, it seems to me that they're sitting out there in Madison and they made a determination that that mound is not a burial mound without really knowing. When the president of the Cemetery Commission found the map, after we had already denied the request of the family 3 times, regarding purchase of that particular piece of land, Sharon Belducas had found the map that showed where the circles were, where it was believed mounds were, which included, there were over 138 mounds in that area, including across the street in what is Holy Cross Cemetery.
How many did you say?
138. And then all the mounds that were across the street, West Boulevard, where CVS now sits in their parking lot. So I know from my position, my perspective, we are down to counting the mound that's in question, 13 mounds in Mound Cemetery, out of 138 that we had promised to protect and preserve when we purchased that land.
Well,
And-
again, does the Historical Society, are they considering it from that aspect also?
I don't believe that they are.
Okay.
Well, but they should be, because once that cemetery is cataloged, which ours is, Mound Cemetery is, there should be no discussion regarding if there are people buried there or not. For the belief to be that this was ceremonial or sacred in any way just triggers that protection that it should be left alone.
All right, and I think that needs to be brought out, and I appreciate you bringing that issue up, because I've only heard the thing about buried bodies. And I guess my last question is, and then we're just about out of time, there are 14, well, you say there's 13 mounds. The marker at the cemetery says there's 14. What's going on at the other 12 mounds? Are they being left alone, or?
Those
or
are being
they-
left alone. They are more obvious mounds because they're larger.
Oh, okay.
One has a marker on it, signifying that this is a mound. The others have trees planted on it in a way that would preserve whatever was in the center. So
All right, well, thank you very much.
I would
Alderman
like to
Weidner.
add something. If I
Go
may.
ahead, throw it in there.
There's been a lot of discussion about, this family that had made the request. And I just want to make it very clear that the Cemetery Commission, and myself in particular, it never was about a particular family and their request. No matter who would have made a request, our recommendation would have been the same. The denial would have been the same. And I think those that are saying, but it's because it's this family and they've done so much for the city that they should be given preference over anyone else, in my view, is wrong. Anybody that made that request would have been denied. And those very people that are saying because they are the family that they are, if we would have recommended selling that land to them because of their family name and what they do for the city, we would have been accused of, crony capitalism. So we, the cemetery, had blindfolds on as to who was making the request. We only considered the request, not who was making the request. And regardless of who it was, it could have been the President of the United States making the request, and our recommendation would have been the same because of our understanding of the promises that we made that we would protect and preserve those mounds, and knowing that we really have done a poor job of doing that, we were determined to protect what is left.
I'd like to just throw in, I think I missed this on the introduction, you are also head of this cemetery?
I'm not the
commission?
head, no.
Okay.
I am a 14-year member of the Cemetery Commission.
Okay, so you're very familiar with the operation there,
Absolutely.
right?
The-
All right, just want to make sure everybody understood that you're not talking just as an alderman, you're also as a member of the Cemetery Commission, you've been involved with this for many years.
Absolutely.
All right, well, apparently the mounds represent more than just piled up dirt, and I think we need to take that into consideration. I want to agree with you on that, and I want to thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And we'll end off the show now, and thank you much for watching.